Life's too short to drive boring cars. Is this a luxury vehicle? No, not really. It's a Toyota, but it's reliable and it holds its value very, very well. What about this? Is this a luxury vehicle? Yes, it's a Jaguar. It is considered a luxury vehicle, but it depreciates very, very harshly. Why is that? Why does this vehicle not hold the same value as the Toyota when in fact this vehicle cost almost twice as much when it was brand new? I'm going to share with you 6 reasons why this is actually happening to used luxury cars. Let's get into it now. So the first reason why used luxury vehicles are just so cheap, and it has to do with maintenance costs. Because when the vehicle is new, obviously people can afford it, they don't worry about it, and often vehicles don't need a whole lot of maintenance, service, or repairs when they're within the warranty period. However, after 4, 5, 6 years, they start to add up. For example, look right here. Here we have a beautiful set of SUVs. On one hand, we have an Audi, absolutely beautiful vehicle, and over here we have a base model Toyota. As an example, these vehicles generally use a little bit less oil. Sometimes they even use Dino oil, where here you've got very prescriptive maintenance regimes and you often use synthetic. A lot of these engines are more powerful, they have turbos, and they use actually a lot more oil within the system. Naturally, a lot of the parts that you'll find under the hood, the manufacturers charge you up the chute just to buy that filter and that new starter and that water pump. Whereas over here, they know that these people are generally more frugal, and so they don't charge a whole lot of money for new parts when there's a necessity to change them. I'll give you another example. Look over here on the brakes. Look at the size of brakes. Very small on the Toyota. Caliper's tiny. The disc, the rotor is only probably about 12 inches in diameter. How about the Audi, for example? Right there, this disc is way larger. It's probably almost 50% larger in diameter. The brakes are gonna cost more. Look at the size of the caliper. So there's probably 4 or 6 caliper pots in there squeezing at the brakes. Of course, this is going to do a better job of braking. It's more of a performance-based machine, but it's all of that performance wrapped up under this that's going to cost you more money when the vehicle is used. On top of that, other things are going to start getting more costly. Of course, you get 60, 70, 80,000 miles on the Audi and you're going to have problems. You're going to start seeing deterioration on equipment like turbos. That's going to cost you. For example, it might cost you $2,000, $3,000 to get a new turbo installed if one burns out. Over here, you won't have that. That's very basic and simple. People become more and more frugal as they're looking for used cars. They want something that's simple, cheap to maintain, cheap to run, and at the end of the day, that's what drives the cost of the used luxury car way down the toilet. So the second reason why used luxury cars are just so cheap is because, for example, right here, we walk along and we see lots of great vehicles. Lease returns, that's right, that's the flavor of the day. A lot of people no longer want to hold on to a vehicle for more than 3 or 4 years with fear of expensive repairs and servicing. So a lot of people are leasing these vehicles. Well, what ends up happening is these vehicles eventually come off of lease and they flood the market. What you see here is an absolute flooding in the dealership network, coming back from leases, coming back through the auctions, coming back in different scenarios, and they wind up with a lot of vehicles on the lot. Now, this generally overabundance of lease returns creates an environment where there's many to choose from. You have great options. You can be picky as a buyer, whether you want the cars, the colors, the miles, and then a lot of times dealers and even the used car market has to be more competitive to move their vehicle along. So it's the overabundance of use of leasing that causes this phenomenon and drives used car prices down in the luxury segment. So the third reason why used luxury cars are just so cheap is mainly because they were overinflated in the first place. Look, what do we have right here? We have a Mercedes-Benz. Beautiful vehicle, there's no doubt about it. But there's so many of these, they're mass-produced, and you can't tell me that a vehicle like this is worth $100,000 collectively. Once the design, engineering, and pre-production work is done, the rest is all gravy. For example, everything's plastic on these vehicles nowadays. There's no way these cars cost a sum of their parts. I mean, after all, you've got plastic parts all over the engine, water pumps, cooling system parts, even fittings for turbos. You've got plastic abound. Even down here, this is all plastic. What do you think? More plastic? More plastic? More plastic? More plastic? Not like what they used to make. Lots more plastic. And even these fake chrome tips are plastic. They look like metal, but they're actually plastic. So there's a lot more plastic in this vehicle than meets the eye. And everyone knows plastic is cheap today. Whether they use injection molding and now there's 3D printing, there's lots of technologies that can support the use of plastic They can make it very precise. They can design parts that are bang on the money. But the problem is, it's all this cheapness that's installed in these vehicles that increases profit margins to the point where these vehicles are way grossly overpriced brand new. So it's not until they finally hit the used market that the true value of this vehicle actually settles into where it should be. If you were to take a brand new vehicle like this and you were to cut the value in half, brand new as a new MSRP, that's probably closer to what the vehicle's actually worth. So then by the time the vehicle's 5 years old and it's sitting at about 60% depreciation rate, that's mainly because these vehicles were so overpriced in the first place. So the next reason why used luxury cars are just so cheap is the overuse, overabundance of luxury amenities, electronics, technology, performance add-ons. For example, right here we look at a Jaguar, beautiful vehicle. Yes, there's lots of amenities. Leather interior doesn't cost you much for maintenance, but I'll tell you that oversized large sunroof on the roof might cost you maintenance if that thing starts to break down or comes off the rails. As well, the infotainment system is often in need of firmware updates, repairs. There's glitches that happen with that regularly. Lord knows I've had my share. I have a Jaguar F-Type R and I've had lots of issues. I've already had to get new SIM cards installed by the dealer because mine failed. Software updates didn't take several times, and actually my vehicle had to spend about a week in the shop just to get some of that sorted out. But guess what? I have the problem and it's back again. But there's more. A lot of these vehicles use turbos or superchargers. In a lot of modern day vehicles, blown, that's forced induction. In other words, they're adding power by increasing the manifold pressure. Well, you don't have that in a Toyota. It's just ho-hum. That's right, it's just natural breathing for those cars. So there's less stress going on there, but you also don't have those extra components. Here, superchargers, turbochargers, extra heat, fries parts under the hood, which is one part of it, but then the components themselves wear eventually as well, and that's another issue. How about another one? Look at the back. Right there, you have the exhaust system. Well, guess what? On a lot of modern luxury vehicles now, you have exhaust valves. So you can start default mode, the exhaust is quiet and just cruises along. But for that sporting appeal, you push a button, and then it just chugs along and it makes it more aggressive sounding. Well, guess what? That in itself is a problem. A lot of times these Jags, BMWs, Mercedes, any of these that have these active or dynamic exhaust systems often find failures along the way. I mean, there's mechanical valves in the exhaust system that toggle in and out depending on your controls in the dashboard. Those parts fail, they do, and then they get kind of expensive when it's time to fix. We also can't forget in a lot of modern vehicles, and even more so in modern luxury vehicles, is the use of direct injection. That's right, direct injected engines are great. They increase performance, they increase fuel economy, they work every single time better. They're more precise, they idle smoother, they're just a better overall design. Until it comes time to decarbonize your intake manifold, because what happens is they're spraying excess amount of fuel at the backside of the valves. You wind up with a large volume of carbon in the backside of the valves, the heads, the intake manifold, and it's all of that carbon that starts to build up, that soot that creates layers in there and ultimately decreases performance and is its own performance aspect as well. Unfortunately, everything has a downside. And another reason why used luxury cars might be just so cheap is because there's an overprevalence of cheap materials being used. If you're talking about a Mercedes from, say, 30 years ago or 25 years ago, the parts used in there were mostly metal, they were built at a much higher standard. Today, there's a much lower grade. Like I said, almost ties into the overpricing on the front end and the other point that I made, but it essentially is due to the cheaper materials, they increase their profit margins by getting creative with injection molding and mass amounts of plastic. For example, right here, BMW is the classic vintage. They're investing millions into the technology of injection molding and 3D printing. These guys are classically known for lots of plastic parts that fail. I mean, you've got radiators in there you can see, but it's not the radiator that fails, it's the neck and where the cooling line hooks up to it, because it's all plastic snapped together fittings with a little key on it, and they crack and they break and they start to leak. But it's the hoses, it's the water pumps, it's the thermostat, and all of the other plastic mumbo jumbo that you find under the hood of these crusty cars is what makes them start to leak and cost you lots of money. Let's also not forget about all the other plastic. This whole bumper is plastic. The rockers down here are plastic, as are the door handles and the mirrors. How about this whole bottom section of rear bumper? That's all plastic as well. And did you realize lots of the interior parts are starting to be recycled? In other words, BMW, yes, they're recycling plastics and putting them back into new vehicles. And then there's other things too, not just BMW, a lot of other brands. For example, instead of bolting hinges to the door, now a lot of them are using glue. Sure, glue is strong, but they're using cost-cutting measures, gluing parts on instead of bolting parts, using substandard parts third-partied out, and hey, hence we're dealing with a supply chain issue right now where they can't get chips, and that's why you can't buy a new BMW today, is because they're third-partying that out to other countries that supply this, and now unfortunately parts are not available because of the crisis that we're in. But it's the ultimate technology today. It almost doesn't matter what kind of vehicle you're dealing with, whether it's a BMW or you've got a Volvo, Infiniti, Audi, and essentially the Volkswagen Group. They all use cost-cutting measures to remain competitive, and unfortunately, it's always what's inside that counts. They put all the bling on the outside, but it's what's underneath that starts to let you down if that vehicle was poorly built. And the last reason why used luxury cars are so cheap has to do with more of the economic side of it. For example, here you have a beautiful vehicle. We're looking at an Infiniti, and I know it's sometimes a great deal buying one that's 1 or 2 years old, but sometimes now with the incentives that manufacturers are offering, they often offer much better, much more aggressive finance, lease rates than you would get in the used car market. On a used cars, you might go to the bank or you might go in-house financing on a used vehicle. You might get maybe 2, 3, 4, 5% on a certified pre-owned or some reasonable vehicle. If you buy a new vehicle, sometimes some of these finance rates are 0% over 3 years, or there might even be finance rates at 0.5, 0.9, 0.49%. You get far more aggressive lease rates, far more aggressive finance rates, and this all adds up to more of a motivation to buy that vehicle new. The only time it becomes more motivation to buy used is once you're out of that window and you can see the differential is adding up. For example, maybe buying a 3 or 4 year old car, there might be enough difference in savings within the price of that car that it just doesn't offset the aggressive price on a new lease rate or finance rate. And with all of that said, everyone, I'm sure you probably want to understand which vehicles will run over 300,000 miles. Bingo, right there. You're going to love that video. It's going to share the whole story with you. Hope to see you guys real soon. Catch you then. Bye-bye.